Somewhere in the beginning or the front of this video, there's going to be a disclaimer that this video includes a paid promotional. Now, what that means is that this company, Vangoa is how I pronounce it, reached out to me and asked me if I wouldn't review their HA-50 all-in-one stereo piece of gear. Actually, it's more than stereo, and we'll get into it in just a minute, but they asked if I wouldn't do it. They like what I do, and it's not something that I would use. You get to keep it, so I guess in that way you're getting paid, although when you look at the number of hours it takes to test it and put together the video, I'm not working for very much money, but that's okay. Sometimes I like to go ahead and test a piece of new gear. This is brand new. It's on Amazon right now. Right now being May of 2025, and I think it's selling for 110 US dollars. So that's kind of the piece of gear, but I like to do this every now and then, test something newer. I obviously specialize in older vintage gear, but I do like to throw some of the newer stuff out there. And if you're like me, you're kind of always wondering about some of the gear you see, some of the amplifiers. This particular one says, I think, 440 watts amplifier. So, what is it really doing there? And, I thought, sure, why not do it? I don't have a need for this, so the fact that I get to keep it, I don't have any need for it in my life right now, but sometimes you run into a friend or a family member that may have a need for something like this. So it'll probably sit around until I find a use for it. Be that as may, let me talk a little bit about it, and we'll do kind of like a tour user close-up, and I'll talk about kind of what I found from using it, and I'll kind of do that at the beginning of it, and then I'll pop the cover off and show you what it looks like inside, and then I will show you the data and give you a final summary of what I thought after listening to it and using it. But that's kind of the scoop on this guy. I will say that when it came, the foam had the little plastic around the corners, which I thought was neat to protect it in its packaging, and it's pretty much all metal except maybe the knobs I don't think are metal, but the front plate as well as the cover and back are all metal, and it does have a fan to help cool it. So it's not a Class D amplifier, it is a Class AB amplifier, and you'll see a little bit more about that when I pop the cover off. The other thing is that I told them I don't pull any punches as far as what I think about its performance, as well as any quirks in using it, and so I don't, I'm not gonna just say nice things about this because they sent it to me for free. So I will definitely talk about all its problems and that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of maybe like just a curiosity video as to what some of this gear can do, and it does have some merits. So what I'm going to do now is do a close-up, and then I'll explain what I found from using it and that kind of thing, and then we'll also look at the back and see what's going on there. But this thing, you could hook up to 8 different speakers if you wanted to. It does have that capability. I only tested it with 4 speakers. That's quite enough. And like I said, it's kind of laid out a little bit differently, and it has microphones for karaoke, and it has some different kind of inputs for SD, and it does have Bluetooth capability and an FM tuner. I mean, it can do everything but probably wash your dishes. So we'll get into that right now. I'm going to start with the rear of the HA-50. We'll start over here. We have our FM antenna. Now, it actually has what looks like an SMA connector, which you usually see with Bluetooth, and that is for the FM connector, which is supplied. You also have DVD, CD line inputs, and then you have a line out, and that's variable depending on your volume control. It will be affected, as well as changing your bass and treble controls will affect what's coming out of here. You do have a total of 8 speaker connectors. Now, I would recommend never connecting more than 2 to it. You could do 4, and you'll see that in the data, where I tested 4 4-ohm loads. But for the most part, I think it would be great for just 2 speakers, but you could, in theory, use 8, though I would not recommend it. C and the D are your right channel, I believe, and then the A and the B are the left channel, or it could be vice versa. But each channel has its own volume control. Here we have a front view of the HA-50. I've got it selecting the auxiliary input, which is done right here on the input selector. And it is saying but you can kind of figure out that it's the auxiliary input. Power on off switch here. Once again, this is our input selector. So we go between DVD, CD, auxiliary, and MP3 Bluetooth. So the MP3 selects the USB or the SD card. I'm not sure which one it takes preference on. I do know it worked with either one. However, it will only read .mp3 files, no WAV files, WMA, FLAC files, nothing like that. Just good old MP3 files. Also, if you were to press the mode button here, it would then go into Bluetooth mode or FM tuner mode. Now, we do have our channel A, channel B, channel C, and channel D individual volume controls. C and D are your right channel, and A and B are your left channel. We do have an 1/8 inch stereo input jack for the auxiliary input selection, and we have 2 microphone inputs. There is a mic volume input as well as an echo effect. And I tried both of these and they worked just fine. We then have our master volume control, which is this guy here. And for most of the testing, I left that at pointing about halfway mid-range. And then I adjusted the channel C and channel A volume controls till I had, I think it was 23 dB of gain or something like that. We do have a bass and treble control here, but basically they were set at the maximum, and that was what I had to do to get the best frequency response. As far as the controls here, if you're listening to MP3s, you can go forward or backwards. Now this display will only give you the time that's elapsed on your MP3. It gives you no title or folder or anything like that. It's a very basic MP3 player. So if you press Bluetooth, it goes to the Bluetooth mode. And this other mode here is between tuner and MP3, this guy right here. So if your input selector is on MP3 or Bluetooth, the mode switch allows you to switch between MP3 or tuner, I believe. So once you have popped the cover off, and you can see it has a very nice toroidal transformer here. We have a nice thick heatsink here, and there is a fan that blows cool air across it. There's also 4, I think these are the PNP transistors, and on this side, which you'll see in a moment, are the NPN transistors. And it's built to take apart easily, I guess you would say. And you have your speaker relays here. Here is just another view showing the 4, I think these were the PNP transistors. You also have your 4 main power supply capacitors here, which are 22,000 microfarad at 35 volt. This would be the NPN side, just showing you kind of a close-up view of it. This is a view with it in the tuner mode. You can see we've selected the MP3 Bluetooth mode over here. If we press this, we can get our tuner mode. Now it kind of just does an auto scan. At first, you can step through it, and then it automatically stores the channels. And I don't believe there's any way to manually select a channel. It seems like it stores all the channels the first time it goes through, but I didn't feel the tuner was that valuable to this device. Right now, I am transmitting a 1 kilohertz 0 dBV signal. It's a WAV file that's on a tablet, and I'm transmitting it over Bluetooth to the HA-50, which has the Bluetooth mode selected, and of course I'm paired to the tablet. That was a pretty easy process. And what we're seeing is its signal to noise ratio, the THD plus noise ratio. They're both about the same, around 68 dB. And you can see that our THD is looking pretty good. It's better than 0.005%. We're pretty close to 1 volt output, which would be 0 dBV. Now I did have to adjust the gain a little bit. That would be the volume control gain. And this is measured out from the preamplifier output. So we're basically seeing the response of the internal DAC that the HA-50 uses. Now, in case you're wondering what the signal looks like that's coming over So this is what the signal looks like that was on the WAV file. It's very clean. The SNR is 129 dB and basically no distortion. And this is generated via the Audacity program and converted to a WAV file. And so it's a very, very clean response. And then if I get rid of that, let's go to what we're measuring, and that's that guy right there. So, I mean, definitely not so good, but it kind of just gives you an idea as to how this DAC works with the 1 kilohertz signal. Right now we are looking at our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz. Actually, technically it's 999.75 hertz, but we'll call it our 1 kilohertz THD SNR plot. And this is with a 0 dBV signal going in. The volume control has been adjusted so that I've got as close to 0 dB of gain as I could. You can see the channels are pretty well balanced between about 0.17 dB. THD's, around 70 dB we'll call it, and THD plus noise about minus 70 dB. THD still looking pretty good at 0.00. We'll call it 4%. Now, if you compare this to the plot where we had a 1 kilohertz signal going over Bluetooth, they kind of look about the same overall as far as the THD plus noise and the SNR and the overall THD, which tells me that the DAC is a lot better than the preamp section in the that's buffering the DAC output or amplifying it as may be. So anyway, this kind of just shows you what it looks like at the preamplifier output. And by the way, I'm using the DVD input. Right now we're looking at the frequency response of the HA-50, and this is at the preamplifier output, and I'm using the Bluetooth signal as an input, and the Bluetooth signal I'm using is transmitted from my tablet. It's a WAV file. It's called a chirp signal for measuring frequency response. And if the DAC and preamp were perfect, this would be a flat line at 0. We're a bit over 0 dBV, which isn't a big deal. I have adjusted the volume control a little bit, and this is what I'm ending up with, so it's close enough. The two channels are pretty well matched as far as that goes, but the big takeaway is, say right here at 20 hertz, we're down about, I'll call it 1.6, 1.8 dB because we're starting up at about 0.4. But over at this marker number 2 at about 20.155 kilohertz, we are down about 3 dB from where we started here at about 10 kilohertz. So this thing drops quite a bit at 20 kilohertz, but it starts, let's move this up right here, you start seeing it breaking away there, and that's at 18.574 kilohertz. So that's well beyond most people's hearing, but after that point this frequency response really drops down quite a bit. So that kind of just tells you what to expect before it gets to the amplifier section. Okay, we're looking at our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the HA-50 putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohm loads. Now in this case I'm using the DVD input, and what I did was I set the music/volume control, which is like the master volume control for all of the channels, to about the halfway point. And then I had my loads connected to channel A and channel C. Now channels A and B are designated as your left channels, and channels C and D are your right channels. And what I did is I've set the unused channels, which would be B and D, to 0 gain, and then I moved channels A and C such that I got about 23 dB of gain it's showing. And they're both at about 3/4 of the way over clockwise. So they're almost at max, but not quite there. And this way you kind of can adjust the main music volume control as your master control, and then you could do the individual controls for, say, A and C in this case as your kind of your balance controls by adjusting them. Now, this unit has the capability to connect to 8 different speakers. So you could have 2 speakers for each channel. I don't think I'm going to go that crazy and hook up 8 speakers. I may hook up a couple other loads, some 4 ohm loads that I have to this later on. We'll see how the testing goes. And that is kind of what's going on. So that being said, we're showing SNRs around 60 dB. THD looks actually pretty good, better than 0.07%. THD plus noise minus 59 dB, we'll call it. And you can kind of just see the overall trace. And in case you're wondering what the harmonics look like, let's get them going here. You can see that our third or odd harmonics are higher than the second or even harmonics, which is what you would expect. I switched over to 4 ohm loads, and with it putting out 5 watts into those 4 ohm loads, it looks maybe a little bit worse. The SNR is usually a couple dB worse, about 3 dB worse when you go to 4 ohm loads. Not really any significant change in the THD. The THD plus noise also changed a little bit for the worse when we went into 4 ohm loads, but basically not a major difference in performance between the 4 and 8 ohm loads, at least at 5 watts. So what is the maximum output power into 8 ohms that we can get at 1 kilohertz? And this is using the DVD input. Our volume control is set midway. That's the music volume control it's called. And the left and right volume controls, that's channel A and channel C, are set to give about 23 dB of gain, which you can see here. Doesn't look very pretty. We're right close to 1% THD, 41 dB SNR, minus 39 dB, 38 dB for the THD plus noise. And we're putting out, what, about 34 watts into 8 ohm loads. I could get a tad bit more power, and then we're going to get over 1%. So, you know, it looks pretty ugly, but with 2 channels going, that is about the limit of this guy. I imagine if I have a couple other channels going, it'll be worse than that. And I'll hook up another couple channels here in a little bit just to see what, you know, what it does when, say, I have 2 of these speakers loaded down with 4 ohm loads in this case, and see if this thing survives. Now, one thing I should mention is this fan is very, very noisy. And what I'm going to do now is go ahead and turn it on, and we'll see how much louder it gets. So I'm going to set the microphone down by the fan, and then I'll turn it on, and you'll definitely hear a difference. So now the fan is on. So right now we're just in the normal mode. It's just idling. There's no signal going into it. And I'm going to go ahead and set it up so that it's putting out about 34 watts into the 2 8 ohm loads. And the fan is on, and you can hear the difference in the fan speed / noise. With the HA-50 connected to 4 ohm loads and a 1 kilohertz signal applied, I increased the input level until I got the most power I think I could reasonably get, just to keep the distortion below 1% THD. And you can see we're right at about 46 watts into 4 ohm loads. THD plus noise not looking very good, and the SNR not looking very good as well. We're still at 23 dB of gain, but it's a bit more power into the 4 ohm loads than it did into the 8 ohm loads, but it's not double the power. And just in case you were wondering what the harmonics look like with it putting out 46 watts into those 4 ohm loads, you can see that our odd or third harmonics are slightly higher than the second or even harmonics. Here is a plot showing the THD versus frequency for several different output power levels, and that would be into 8 ohm loads. The frequency range is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, of course, and we have powers ranging from 1 watt to 34 watt. These are our 34 watt guys, and they're right around 1% throughout the middle of the band anyway. You can see that at the low end of the band, up to maybe, 60 hertz, our THD is above 1%. And other than that, I mean, it looks kind of what you would expect for something like this guy. Here is a plot showing the THD versus output power, and this would be for 8 ohm loads and a 1 kilohertz test signal. And the volume gain has been set for 23 dB still. And what it shows is that at our lower power levels, we're, say, around 2 watts or so, we're better than 0.1% THD. And actually it decreases up till about, looks like maybe 24, 25 watts. And then the THD starts going up, and it's about 1% right at, we'll say, oh, that's probably 34 watts or so. We saw that. But as soon as we get a little bit higher in power, the THD really goes up. And by 40 watts, we're at almost 10% THD. Here we have the HA-50's frequency response from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And this is using the DVD input, and we're measuring at the preamp output. Now the volume control has been adjusted for 0 dB of gain in this case, and this is a pretty interesting one. At the high end of the band, at say 18.6 kilohertz, we're down 3 dB, and at the low end of the band, at 20 hertz, we're down 6 dB. Now our frequency response gets a lot better. We're only down maybe a dB at 60 hertz. So it's, you know, not the worst I've ever seen, but you're not going to get your low frequency bass out of this guy. Hopefully you weren't really expecting it. But it kind of just gives you an idea that there's something going on here that we didn't see when we looked at the frequency response, or when we will look at the frequency response when we use the Bluetooth mode. So we're using a DAC, and then I would assume it goes through the same kind of buffering system before it goes to the main amp, but apparently not. So the CD input, I looked at that, and that looks identical to this, kind of as you would expect. So it's not the best frequency response in the world, that's for sure. But the nice thing is the two channels are balanced to within probably less than 0.2 of a dB. And one thing I forgot to mention, for all of the frequency and THD measurements that I've done measuring at the preamplifier out, I've had the bass and treble controls at their maximum, which would be full clockwise, to get the frequency response to be the flattest. And here is the HA-50's frequency response from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, with it putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohm loads. Now, it shows that it's down almost 6 dB at 20 hertz. However, by the time we're at 61.2 hertz, we're only down a dB. And at the high end of the band, we're at down 2 dB at about 18.2 kilohertz. So that's definitely not a stellar frequency response. The specification is that it should be plus or minus 2 dB from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. It's just kind of the basic thing, so it would not be meeting that requirement. But this kind of just gives you an idea of how it performs when it's putting out 5 watts into 8 ohm loads. And once again, I'm using the DVD input, and the volume controls were set for about 23 dB of gain. Here's the HA-50's frequency response with it connected to 4 ohm loads, and it's putting out about 5 watts into those 4 ohm loads. The span is, of course, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and it basically looks darn near the same as it did into 8 ohm loads. Here is a plot showing the THD versus output power, and this would be for 8 ohm loads and a 1 kilohertz test signal. The volume gain has been set for 23 dB still. And what it shows is that at our lower power levels, we're, say, around 2 watts or so, we're better than 0.1% THD. And actually it decreases up till about, looks like maybe 24, 25 watts. And then the THD starts going up, and it's about 1% right at, we'll say, oh, that's probably 34 watts or so. We saw that. But as soon as we get a little bit higher in power, the THD really goes up, and by 40 watts, we're at almost 10% THD. Here is the HA-50's Crosstalk with the active channel putting out about 5 watts into 8 ohm loads. I'm using the DVD input, and the volume controls have all been set such that we have 23 dB of gain. There is no specification for it. It's kind of here for your entertainment. And it doesn't look really bad, surprisingly. It's better than 32 dB here at the very high end of the band. But, you know, for the most part, it's above 50 dB throughout the band.
Here's a plot showing the HA-50's damping factor. There is no specification for the damping factor. It's just here for entertainment purposes. And really, it's not so bad. I mean, maybe 32 or so for the worst case for the left, and the right is maybe a minimum of 42. What's interesting is there's a big difference between the two channels. And this actually would be, the left channel would be the A channel and the right channel would be the C channel. And both channels have been adjusted to give us 23 dB of gain. Right now I've connected another two 4 ohm loads to channels B and D. Before we just had 4 ohm loads on channels A and C. Like I said, you could actually run 8 speakers on this guy, and I just decided I would run 4 ohm loads and see what it does, because I can't really see you running more than 4 ohm speakers. And I'm putting out about 10 watts into those 4 ohm speakers, so it's doing good on the THD front. The SNR front doesn't look so good, and the THD plus noise doesn't look so good either. But overall, it's about 10 watts into 4 ohm loads, and the gain went up when I did that for some reason. All the gains went up. The actual gain was right around 23 dB, and when I did all 4 of them, for some reason it went to 24 dB. So right now what I'm going to do is increase the signal level and see how much power we can get with the 4 ohm loads connected, all 4 ohm loads. So with all 4 ohm loads connected, you can see we're pretty close to 1% THD, and our SNR is 35 dB or so, THD plus noise minus 34 dB. Nothing spectacular. The output power for all 4 of the channels would be about 28 watts into those 4 ohm loads. So that kind of just gives you an idea as to how much power this guy could put out into 4 ohm load speakers with the distortion level around 1%.
The HA-50 does come with a little remote control that has 1 or 2 functions that are not up front, one of those being the mute button, and the other is an EQ button, which allows you to select a pop or a rock setting for the equalizer. Now, the bass and treble controls for the unit I had and for all of my testing, they were set full clockwise at the full maximum amount of treble and bass, and even then, as you saw, we had a nice cutoff at around, I think it was 18.6 kilohertz on the high end of the band, and at 20 kilohertz we're down 6 dB, even with the bass and treble controls at maximum. So, you know, that isn't very good, at least at the low end of the band. The high end of the band, most of us can't hear, 18.6 kilohertz, but it is what it is. Now, I should point out that during the testing, the fan would get louder and quieter and louder and quieter. And I set up the microphone so that you could hopefully hear it change when I started applying some signal to it to make it work harder, and the fan would be louder. Well, I ended up modifying that because it was pretty annoying on the bench. However, when I hooked it up to the Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2 loudspeakers and my little hi-fi Walker music DAP and listen to music, once the music was playing, this thing sounded just fine, really. You couldn't really hear the fan through the music that was on, and I got up to probably 84 dB SPLs. I may have been able to push it a little bit more, but I didn't. And then I got to thinking, well, I can modify that fan. I did some testing and I figured out where to connect it to 5 volts rather than about 14 or 15 volts that was driving it, and it seemed to work okay. I'm not suggesting that anybody do that. I just did it because if I were to use this thing, I wouldn't want the fan that loud. With 5 volts going into the fan, it was much quieter, just like a normal piece of gear that has a fan. You could barely hear it. So that's kind of something, if you know what you're doing, you could probably do. Now, it has a lot of noise. If you just terminate, say, the DVD input, select the DVD input, and listen for hum and hiss, it had a lot of hum and hiss. And it seems like when you first turn it on, it would be louder, and then as soon as you move the master volume control down, it got to where it wasn't as loud, but you could definitely hear it 6 feet away from the Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2s. That's the hum and the noise, and that was with the volume control all the way at a minimum, the master volume control. I basically left the channel A and C, which would be right and left controls, at probably the 3/4 of a way clockwise position for all my testing and my listening, and I just used the master volume control. My recommendation to Vangoa was that to do away with the ability to drive 8 speakers, and I would not have 4 individual volume controls. I would have 1 volume control and a balance control and a speaker and B speaker switch. So I would have it drive 4 speakers, and it did drive 4 ohm speakers. I forgot what power I got out of it, but it was, I think, less than 20 watts. So, and that was at 1% THD. I'm doing this from memory. I don't remember the exact data, but it's obviously in the video before this. So, it did perform with 4 speakers, although it's not something I would recommend for 4 speakers. Your best bet in using this would be 2 8 ohm speakers, but 2 4 ohm speakers would be fine. Like I said, if you're listening to normal music levels, you wouldn't really hear the fan, but it is pretty noisy when the fan's on. And I said the hiss, hum kind of thing that you get out of this until music is going is a little bit annoying. The FM tuner seemed to pick up channels okay, but there was like some static in the real weaker stations, and I think that was more of that hum and hiss coming in. I don't think you really need an FM tuner on this guy. I did use the microphone inputs, and they worked just fine, and the little echo came on. And the one nice thing was I'm right in front of the speakers, the mic is, and I got no feedback issues. So that was a nice, but I'm not somebody who sings into a microphone or talks into a microphone other than when I'm doing this or recording data for the video. So just doing karaoke is not my kind of thing, but you could certainly do it with this. Now, there is not a different level for the microphones. It's part of the master volume control. I guess you could play games with the master volume control and each of the channels for the volume, but that's for you to play around with. The one thing I didn't like, and I let Vangoa know, is that this will only play MP3 format. So when it says MP3 on the front, it doesn't mean only MP3s, no WAV files or FLAC files, which is kind of strange. Plus, it doesn't give you the track ID of what's playing. It just is number 1 or 2. It doesn't, I think, even tell you if it's in a certain folder. So it's kind of worthless for that purpose, for just an MP3 player. I guess if that's all you had, it was MP3s, and you just wanted background music, you put it in and let it play, I guess then it would be okay. You didn't care what was playing, that kind of thing. But it did play MP3s, and through either the USB or the SD card. It does have an 1/8-inch stereo auxiliary jack up front, which I did not try, but it's there if you wanted to use it. And they could also go away from using the push-in speaker binding post. I recommended they have the 3-way banana jack style speaker connector post in a future product. And it's kind of just a basic thing, but it feels solid, and it looked like it was built okay on the inside. It was class AB, and it's it could have some potential for certain needs. As for the sound of the HA-50, once I was listening to some music a little bit louder, say in the mid 70s to upper 70 dB SPLs, which is a decent listening level, to where I didn't hear the fan noise. That was gone, as well as any of the noise from the power supply hiss. It actually didn't sound bad at all. I was actually surprised. It did a really good job with one of my bass test tracks, which is the Hi-Fi Collective Slow Reduction, I believe is the track. And that has a lot of low bass in it, and it sounded really good, and with everything hooked up the way that it was. I listened to a bunch of different music, and I thought it did a decent job, surprisingly. I didn't, like I said, push it more than about 84 dB SPLs, I think, but it it sounded okay at a decent listening level, what I would consider a decent listening level. So I thought that was a good indicator of, the potential with this under the right circumstances. And that's, kind of my take. It's not going to give you the 440 watts, that's for certain. But, you could probably get 100 watts out of this thing with 4 speakers. It seems like that's about the limit. So, 25 watts a speaker. As far as pairing it with the Bluetooth, that's kind of how I tested the DAC into the unit by measuring at the preamplifier out. So it did pair pretty easily. I believe it came up as HA-50 on my tablet and connected right away, and it seemed to play for the testing that I did. Also, the preamplifier output, you saw the data on that. It is a variable output, it's not fixed, so that could be handy if you were wanting to use a subwoofer possibly with this kind of guy, and you might need it because the roll-off is pretty substantial there at 20 hertz. Not that most speakers can reach 20 hertz, but it might help with certain applications for a subwoofer. So that's kind of my take on this guy. I'm not, sure I'll get other things from this company. Maybe they'll come up with an improved unit and take some of my suggestions in there and make it more vintage looking. That was one of my comments as well to them. So that's kind of my take on it. I hope you guys will leave me some comments, and as always, I do try to reply back to those. And if you like the video, helps to give me a thumbs up. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, I hope you will consider doing that. So once again, until next time, I hope you have a great day or night.